So let's talk about building a database, and let's start with the idea of pre-planning. That is, talking about the things that need to be done before you ever start to build your database. A few important notes to start with. Number one, remember that there are powerful forces resisting change. That is, while you may be sold on the idea of implementing a database, your customers are not necessarily sold on the idea, your employees may not be sold on the idea, and the IT people in your organization might not be sold on the idea. So there are powerful forces resisting any change made by the organization. Second, by waiting, you let the competition get further ahead. You always say, well, we're going to put a database in when when the competition puts their database in. And then you turn around one day and all the main competitors have a database in and database strategies, and you're still thinking about it. You're always better off to be on the front end of the learning curve than the back end of the learning curve. And then finally, developing a database is only the start of a long learning curve that will change how you handle your customers and how you think about your customers. When you have a database, you start thinking about your customers in terms of how much they are worth to your organization over time. Looking at your customers as assets that need to be managed the same way you would manage your 401k. Kinds of databases, well, we have active customer databases, and of course this is the database that most of us talk about when we talk about a database. But then you have this set of inactive customers. These are people who used to be customers but are no longer active. And of course you want to keep that database because those people might be your best prospects to become customers again. And then you'll have a database that may have a number of prospects that come from a number of lead generating activities that you might be performing. And then finally, you might have referrals. We typically like to try to keep the referrals separate because they are often your best prospects and potentially your most profitable new customers. Keys to success. Well, how does the customer profit from the relationship? That is, if I'm going to try to build a relationship, I'm going to use a database to try to increase lifetime value. The question is, why would a customer want to build a relationship with me? That is, what's in it for them? Do they find that as you build a relationship with them, it increases trust? Maybe it's risk reduction. Remember, we talked about the idea of reducing perceived risk and the 5 types of perceived risk. Or does it lower the long run costs for them? So what's in it for the customer? And then, of course, the second question is, how does the firm profit from building relationships? Well, of course, we all understand that firms typically profit from the relationship by increasing retention, increasing spending, increasing referrals, and reducing costs. The bottom line is that the cost of building, maintaining, and operating a database must be less than the increased profits obtained by using a database marketing strategy based on the information you're collecting. That is, you have to make more money from the database than it costs to build, maintain, and operate it. Some requirements for databases. We'll go through these relatively quickly. One is a custom design. That is, the database has to fit the organization. Today, many off-the-shelf database packages are flexible enough that the organization can customize them to fit their specific needs. An example of this is at UNLV. Many of the organizational units at UNLV have adopted Salesforce as their database. So for instance, the graduate college uses Salesforce as their database for incoming and continuing graduate students. In addition, the people at undergraduate student recruiting use Salesforce, and a number of the other organizations across campus use Salesforce. But the benefit of Salesforce is that it's customizable so that the organization can set it up to operate in the way that is correct for UNLV. It needs to be dynamic. That is, it needs to be updated, and it needs to be updated rather quickly. There are two ways to update databases, of course. One is a batch update. Even today, many banks will do batch updating. That is, they will reconcile all the books at the end of each day so that when they open the next day, everything is accounted for and all the accounts have been modified. It's a batch approach. But most businesses prefer instantaneous updating. That is, updating the database immediately so that if someone needs to go back into the database 10 minutes after you made a purchase, they can find that purchase and make changes to it if necessary. Third, you need adequate computing. No matter how big the database is, you still are going to need adequate computing for that database. You need to have easy and friendly universal access. That is, all of your employees need to be, that interface with customers need to be able to access the database, and they need to be able to do so in a way that is quick, easy, and understandable. The database needs to be equipped for ad hoc inquiries. That is, to answer questions of what if. The database needs to be profitable. The database needs to be accountable. That is, we need to be able to track our results to demonstrate that the database is increasing the lifetime value of our customer base and making our organization more profitable. It needs to be separated from the billing files, and it needs to be controlled by a database administrator. Some cautions. A marketing database will cost the organization money. Everyone always says, well, don't worry about how much it's going to cost. Yeah, worry about how much it's going to cost. A marketing database requires imaginative and creative leadership. Lots of people put in a database and they never make any money from it. And part of that reason is because they have the database, but they don't know how to use it in an imaginative and creative way to increase retention, increase spending, increase referrals, and reduce costs. And understand that marketing databases are new territory for most companies. I was working with a non-for-profit about 10 years ago, and it's a non-for-profit that you would identify, a local non-for-profit. And they decided to put in Razor's Edge, which is a not-for-profit sort of off-the-shelf database marketing package, which tracks donors and it's like Salesforce, except it's really designed for not-for-profits and fundraising. They spent a bunch of money on, they were doing fine, but they knew that in the future they were going to have to get better. So they bought Razor's Edge and went and had all of their employees trained on Razor's Edge. And then I met with them about 10 months later, and they were very disappointed because they saw it as a cost, but they had not realized any profits. And the reason they hadn't realized any profits is that they had never figured out how to come up with imaginative, creative strategies to increase lifetime value of customers. Some database decisions. Well, the first decision, of course, is should the database be housed in-house or should it be outsourced? That is, should the organization have its own database or should they outsource the whole project to someone else? Some of the internal examples are Goldmine Access, Salesforce, Razor's Edge, on and on and on, versus having someone outside, for example, Oracle, maintain and run our database for us. This is an interesting decision, right? Because the benefits of being in-house is that you maintain control. The benefit of it being outsourced is experts are running the database. And so typically something that you have run externally will actually be implemented faster. So in-house, you gain control and you lower costs, but you need the expertise to make that happen. Should it be customized or off the shelf with add-ons? And of course, the answer is it depends how customized it has to be and how much different your business might be from all others. Now, everyone thinks their business is special, but most of the off-the-shelf database programs are flexible enough that most organizations will find that a off-the-shelf with options kind of a database will be plenty flexible for their needs. Then we need to make decisions about what data to include in our database. Then we need to understand how that data is going to be used. And then, of course, we have to make that decision of who has access to that database. That is, who can go in and actually download stuff from that database. Will it be all the frontline employees? Will it be all the managers? Who will it be that has access to that database? Some technical issues in database marketing. First, don't assume that the current computer is the one that should run your database. Your database, all your database stuff needs to be constantly backed up, and it typically ought to be run on a computer where nothing else is being run on that server to follow things up. Don't assume that your MIS expert knows anything about database marketing. Hopefully they're good at being a database constructor, but do not think that they are going to be a database creator. And you shouldn't rely on them to be a creator, and you shouldn't assume that anything they say about creating marketing programs is necessarily accurate. Your MIS person has a vested interest in the current system. And in fact, many IS, IT, or comp sci people at an organization are anti-marketing database people. And that's because they don't want to have access to database information by people who are not skilled computer technicians. And then secondly, they don't want to lose any control. So your MIS person may be your biggest obstacle to getting a database implemented. I have a story about that from the Thomas and Mack Center 20 years ago when we tried to convince them that they should switch ticketing software companies. And the MIS person just resisted us, even though everyone in the organization knew that the Thomas and Mack would be better off with a different system that had a better backed up database and was using a computer language that would interface with other computer languages that were readily available to design bridge programs. And and also understand that priority might be an issue if you're going to use the organization's existing mainframe. That is, you have to be able to get at your database when you need to. So for the planning team, the first thing we need to do, we need to determine the uses of the database. That is, how are we going to use the marketing database once we design it? Will it be used for relationship marketing, retention, increased spending, increased referrals, reduced costs? If that's the case, then a lot of the usage of that database are going to be communication related. What kinds of communications are we going to send to our customers, and what kinds of responses, and how are we going to capture responses back from those customers? Second, the customer service element of it. Are we going to have customer service tied into our customer database or not? Remember my famous story about my Isuzu Trooper. Are your service people going to have access to the database, and are they going to take a Pete Fader approach to customer centricity, where they identify who the best customers are and they provide the best service to the best customers on down the line. Some other uses of the database. We might be interested in a frequency marketing program, also sometimes called a rewards program or a loyalty program. Are we going to try to increase the share of customer? That is, are we going to try to get the customer to spend all of their dollars in the product category that we represent from us? Are we going to go in and try to identify who our best customers are? Are we going to model and try to clone our best customers? Are we going to be able to analyze our marketing efforts and track the results? And are we going to be able to use the database to help us prospect for new, high quality, profitable customers?